Okay, so I'm gonna start by doing I'll do a quick tour of. I had some stuff about the like history of After Effects and stuff. I don't know if we need to get into some of that. There's also in that PowerPoint. There's also some links to like other online learning resources and some other kind of names of really good design studios and historically great animators. Maybe you can go back and look at that on your own. But for here, this is the general layout of After Effects, and yours might look a little bit different. You probably hopefully see this bar up top. If not, it might be underneath this little arrow here where you have different layouts. And these are just kind of presets for the different windows that you see. And almost all of these you can drag and move around to customize. So if you happen to close something on accident and you don't see that, it's okay. Generally, you can come up to window and just find what that is. If you're looking for the main viewer, it's going to be at the bottom. It's called composition here. Or if that happens to be closed, you can also always, there's this button down here. There's a lot of shortcuts and quick keys and a lot of different ways to do things in here. So let's see. I guess in general, you have the project window. Ah, yes, sure. So let's say you need to relink in your missing files. The first thing you could do is come up to if you want to find your project window if that's not open. So that's going to be this one here. And then to find all the missing ones, you can actually go into your search bar here and just type missing. And let's see, how can I do this? Well, it's going to be under probably one of these, and you'll see these layers here. And they probably have any of these will have that color bar kind of look like the technical difficulties from a television station. In any one of these, you can right click it and go to replace footage. Now, these are all after Illustrator layers, so it imports each layer separately. For this, you just need to go find the correct image. So you can just navigate to wherever it's going to be under. Sorry. We go under here, projects. You dive into that. It'll be under library, art, and then prepped. And you just want to see whichever one you might be on prep 1 or prep 2. And you can see hopefully up here, and you'll just need to select that one. And it might come up. Actually, tell you what, let's this is some of the trickier part of dealing with the program and why you can see it's important to be organized with it. So I'm going to reopen this file. I'm going to break this name here so that comes up for me like this too. Thank you for bearing with me. Recent file. It should have broken it, but I don't know why it didn't. Why didn't it break? I'm going to show you how to import it from scratch, I guess. If you click, if you hit Control I or go to import, exactly. We go to that, import file, and then you can select your file there. And this is where there's some important selections down here. It might be getting confused. Okay, great. Yay. Hurrah. If you were importing fresh, you could bring it in here. And if you keep this as footage, it'll import that whole Illustrator flat as one layer. It'll ignore all the layers. If Great. Thank you, Melissa. If you select composition, either one of these, it will bring in all of the layers like you see in the project window there. Composition, retain layer sizes makes the bounding box of that asset when you bring it in around the asset itself. Whereas if you bring it in as composition, it's like every asset will have that space around it. So it all has the same, whatever your artboard dimensions are, every asset will come in with that same one. There's different benefits for each. I pretty much only use this composition retain layer sizes though. So if you just click that, one thing to be careful of is if you have 1 and 2, you might have the sequence option ticked, and you don't really want that. That is for a different thing I won't really get into. Just for now, you can just make sure that that is not checked. And then when it comes in, I don't know why. It's like you just told it that you want the composition, but it asks you, are you sure you don't want it flat? So just say, yeah, bring me the composition. And it imports it here. And if I were to drag it out of there, you could see it's like that. And then it brings a composition and all the layers. So you can kind of see each one. If you were to double click this, there's the composition window, but then there's the footage viewer too. And the footage viewer is kind of like just the asset itself. So this is not placed in anything. You can't really animate. This is just to be able to look at it. So these are all the different layers. If you double click the composition, you can see that they're all brought in here. And if we went in and we started, it's a good way to, you can see the eyeballs here, so you can turn all those off if you want. And if you started to turn on each one at a time, you'd see how we have it split up. And you could see that inside. Actually, you can, if you select any of these and hit Control E, it'll open it up in Illustrator. So we can see how I have it set up here. It's the exact same layers. I just grabbed, and originally they were all flat, and just make a new layer. And I use that to just drag it onto a new layer then. Now there is a concern after you've imported it. If you add another layer to that file, it's going to get all kinds of goofed up and break. So you kind of have to, you can adjust it. Like, let's say we wanted to open that up and I wanted to change the color of this to be red. If we save that, it might not go right away, but eventually it will update because again, it's referring to that file. So whatever that file shows, it's going to bring in. If you go moving it around, it might get a little weird. it might shift other things. And after animation, it's not really great. So I tend to bring things in and then swap them out because um, what you could do is you can take one of these. Let's say we want this to be this. I've named everything so it's also very clear, like capsule one, capsule two, line one, line two. You can option or alt and hold on to that and it'll swap it out. But you can see it kind of changes the position and stuff. So it doesn't always work out, but there's different ways around that. And that's a big part of my workflow is setting myself up to be able to do that swap easily. And you'll see why it really helps later. Basically, you do the animation once and then you duplicate that comp so that you don't have to animate like 15 of these. You can just kind of change out the art. Okay, we go back into here and see, actually, I'm gonna go back to this one where I was. So if we turn all those back on, you can see them. There's also, if there was audio, there's an audio column here. Turn that on. You can lock things if you're nervous about moving stuff, like this background. You might want to lock that sometimes. There's also a solo button. So if you want to see just one layer, that's a way to do that. On the right here is something called continuously rasterized. That's this little asterisk. And if you have if I drag that in, some of the shortcuts, you can use this to zoom in. That's like your zoom level. You could also use the greater than, less than signs, the comma and the period, to go in and out. So if you want to zoom in and out quickly, that's a quick way to do it. You can see that these are like a little bit fuzzy. It's not real sharp. This continuous rasterization usually fixes that up. I guess it's not a very good example here. But you can often see the difference. It's almost like a slightly pixelated. So that just, especially if you're zooming in, it can really help. Okay, let's see. There's a couple of other settings here. One of them, this one is called motion blur. It's an effect that will basically, if something is moving fast, it will add some blur to it. It adds to the rendering time and it can be a little bit, it's kind of a more advanced technique. So I think we'll get into that later. This is something that this column turns an object into an adjustment layer, meaning you won't see it. You just affect the layers below. That isn't necessarily usually useful for any of the actual layers here, but what you can do is inside here, if you go into layer, you can create new things. So you could create new text. Oops. You could create a solid, which is just a rectangle color solid. And there's different uses for that. You can actually create a light and a camera for some more complex stuff. There's something called a null object, which is basically a control. Allows you to, we'll get into that in a minute, to kind of group things. A shape layer is sort of like a vector shape inside of here with parameters. We'll get into that too. But adjustment layer, if you've worked with Photoshop, you're probably familiar with adjustment layers. An adjustment layer lets you apply an effect to this, and then it applies to everything below it. So also up here is a whole bunch of effects, just like you have in Photoshop. And a lot of them are actually even better in my opinion. But, one would be like, we wanted to do like a hue saturation adjustment. You could apply that from the color correction. And if you start to turn the dial, it's going to change everything below this layer. You could also do that just to the background. So whatever you move this around to, it'll affect, and it's a nice way to be able to play with things. So sometimes that is helpful. A lot of times what we use is for maybe like blurring or other things, and you might draw a mask on this so it'll affect only part of that. Let's see. I should pause. Does anybody have any questions to from where we're at right now? I'm not quite making it through as much of this as I had hoped, but I think so. I'll just keep plowing ahead. Okay, so we have the main part, I guess. Everything really happens in the timeline. Well, I should go back and say compositions are really like the main building block here. So, when I imported this, it brought it in as a composition. But you can also create a new composition, and if you go up to that, I guess that's new layer. So if you go up to composition, new composition, it'll bring up this dialog box. And this is kind of like where you set your artboard, your frame size, your duration. And there's some other technical stuff like frame rate. Frame rate is just like how many frames per second. It generally isn't super important for motion graphics. You could be, say, picking either 30 or 24, but actually we use this 29.97 and 23.976 for technical reasons we won't go into. So either one of those is fine. There's also a bunch of templates up here if you ever wanted. So like a lot of these are old. Nobody really. PAL was like the European TV format, so it was like 720 by 576, and it had this weird square pixel format. Then there's also the like film 4K, or like if you were making like 8K for a presentation or like a big maybe a trade show or something. And you can adjust these too. You're not locked into anything. There is no resolution. There's no like DPI or anything. Everything's 72 DPI. So that's something to remember if you're coming from print. Everything is 72 DPI and RGB. That means in this Illustrator file, you really want to make sure it used to be a real problem. It wouldn't even let you do it, but now I think it lets you do it. It just comes in kind of odd. If you have it set to CMYK, it just doesn't like that. And if you think about it, it makes sense because you're using light instead of ink. So instead of multiplying them together, you're adding the light together. And so the RGB is actually an additive. It's an additive color mode. So it's actually like you can look at the channels here. That's the red channel, that's the green channel, and that's the blue channel. And it's all represented with black and white. And then multiplying those together gives you exactly what you're looking at. And it's there's some interesting effects that you can do with this where you get almost like a 3D glasses effect where you start to split those three apart on the edges, and you get this, like you've probably seen it, like a chromatic, they call it like a chromatic aberration, where you get that kind of rainbow on the edges, a real blurry kind of look. Okay, so if after you've made your composition, let's say we made a new comp, you can also hit Control N to bring this up. So I'll say here, this is going to be, I'm going to put in just 10 seconds. So this is going to be frames, seconds, minutes, hours. We'll just make it 10 seconds. It doesn't really matter that much. And from here, you could bring in anything. And first I would organize this. I would rename it. You can, I guess you can right click it and rename. You can also hit enter. And here I would just say, let's just call it like first comp. And I didn't really explain the project structure too much. It kind of follows the other where I have like library assets separated out. I have a place where I can check the exports and bring those back in. I have a place for pre-comps, which is just like an organizational thing. And then all my main comps I put in here. So like main comp is something I might export. So we have our first comp here, and that means we can go in and if you've brought in your vector file, you could bring it in here, or I just hit Control / to do that. But you could also just drag it. And then, that doesn't, you can do stuff like here, if you right click, there's like transform, and you can fit to comp height or fit to width, or you could do fit, but it might scale it, it might distort it. It won't, these other two will scale it evenly. So from here, you have that, or you could open up your file here and select them all and just come in. And instead of doing the whole comp, maybe we want to paste the whole thing here. So now we've got all of our separate layers in our main comp. And the way we animate is each one of these layers has layer properties to it. So if you twirl one down, and I'll select this one, this capsule one. I guess I forgot to mention when we were going through the labels that there's these color boxes here. You can also color label things. So you can help organize your files that way. And I will often do that. So you could select one and hold Shift to select as many as you want up. You can also hit Control to deselect, kind of like you would in Windows File Explorer. So you can select all those, and then I'm going to make all the capsules orange so I can just easily see. I often make the background brown and lock that. The lines I'll make probably green. Sometimes I try to tie it together. Text I might make, whatever. And now we can quickly see at least what goes together, and that's important because as we animate, we might want to pull the line down to capsule one and start to organize it this way so that you can see things a little more clearly. And for here, let's just say we want it to fade in. So if you twirl this down, you have layer properties, and there's these 5 layer properties are on every single one of these layers, and it's anchor point, which is also, if you hit spacebar and drag, you get the spacebar gives you the hand, so you can then move around. You can, so there's anchor point. If you can scrub all of these, if you drag it, you can also type in a number. You can click it and drag, which they call scrubbing. If you click and drag and hold Shift, it does it by like 10 increments, so it's a little faster. Or if you hold Control, it does it by tenths, so you can dial it in a little bit more. You can also use these tools up here. This one here actually moves the anchor point. So if you didn't want to move it around, you just wanted to move the anchor point, you could say here, we wanted to do this. And now, if we started, you could probably guess, like if we play with the rotation, the anchor point is where is set. Now you could change this here, but then if you go back and rotate it, now it's in a different position. So a lot of times what I do is, there's a lot of Control-Z undoing to get back to maybe where I wanted and say, oh, actually, I want to move the anchor point here. You could also do math in here. Like if you knew that, like if you select this layer up here, or you can right click and say reveal in the project. Now bring it up here, and you could see some details about it up in this window, like it's 516 by 116. So if you know that you want that anchor point right in the middle or right at the edge, 516 is right at the the middle or the end. You type in 0, it's right there. But you could also put in do math right inside of it. So 5/16 either divided by 2 or times 0.5, and now it's right in the middle. And then you can be sure that there's no question of like your logo being centered or something like that. So you have these, you could scrub all of these things: position, up and down. You have scale, which is linked. If you click that, you can link it, distort it, or non-uniform scale, I should say. There's rotation, and then opacity, which is going to fade it out. So this is pretty much the heart of everything. There's a little stopwatch next to all of these, is keyframing. So, and that just means if we go to like 1 second and we set a keyframe here, it's at 100, and we go back to 0 and we type in or scrub down to 0 there, we have these 2 keyframes. And in between that, it's going to what they call interpolate these 2. So if you want it to go slower, you could stretch that out and it'll just take longer to get there. Or maybe you don't want it to start from 0. Maybe you want it to start from half or something, or vice versa. You could drag those around if you want it to go opposite. You could also copy and paste to do this. So fade in. So you can marquee select them, Control C to copy, Control V to paste. And now it thinks, though, I pasted the same one. So now it's going to interpolate back to 0 again. That's not what we want. We want to right click that. And there's keyframe assistant. And you can time reverse. You could also just, oops, I think I stopped sharing. You could also just drag them in reverse. And now they're going to fade in and then fade out. And you can see these 2 keyframes are the same, so nothing's happening in between there. There's also something called a hold keyframe, where if you wanted to like jump on, you could click one here and say that's 0. If you select these, right click, same area, toggle hold keyframe. Now it's not, you can see it's just waiting until it hits that and it just snaps on. So that's helpful sometimes too. And it's all kind of, it's a lot of this is just about problem solving and eye trickery and, just kind of getting done what you need to. So I'm going to get rid of those. This also works for position. So if we wanted it to say slide in, a lot of times I start from the end point, like where it ends up, and then animate it in from there. So I'll make a keyframe there and then go back. And you could also just drag this. Okay, and if we scrub through, we can see it. Up here you can see this thing, which is your work area. And that's kind of like what you will export or preview. So if we set that, if you're not seeing this preview window, you can come up to Window, Preview. Here it is. And if you go back to the beginning, it gives you some options, whether it'll loop back or not. So you can now see it doing that. And if we wanted to see it a little bit longer, we could drag it out, hit play again. So now we can kind of get a sense of, how this is moving. So that's, really, this is the basics of everything in After Effects. It's all just these keyframes in how it moves. Now, there's different ways for this to interpolate. You have these 2 keyframes, but they're just going straight between each other. So there's 2 different things you could do to kind of change that up. You could change up the timing between them. And if we were to select those and right click, if you were to come into this keyframe assistant, you can see these easy ease, and easy ease in and easy ease out. If you click that, it gives you this different, it was a diamond and now it's kind of this like split diamond. Oh, I'm using the plus and minus up on the top of the number keys to zoom in and out. You can also use this up here or drag that. I tend to use the plus and minus a lot more though. There's also this one down here, which kind of does the same thing as this. So now if we were to look at this, you can see it's not really coming at a smooth, it's not a steady speed anymore. It's starting off slow, ramping up, and then kind of smoothing, slowing down as it comes in. And if you were to click this graph here, select this, and then click this graph, you can see the speed of it. So if I come back here and I undo this easy ease, and I can do that just by control clicking, or I could probably, yeah, I just control click them to return them to normal. If you look at this here, you have this speed that, and this is basically just how fast it's going. Exactly, it says it's moving 800 pixels per second. So, I mean, it's just like any physical thing. If we were to do, if we now select those, and I think we can still do easy ease from here, all of a sudden you can see it's starting from 0 velocity. So it's going, and then it gets faster, and then it's going to slow down again. So to compensate for it to go slower, it has to go faster than it was in that. But this is, if you were to drag this out, you can see that, and you can start to play with these curves and play with how much that plays with. Awesome. Thanks for joining, Isaac. You could also, there's a lot, now it really shoots in because we're not even, it's, we want to just maybe something like a bullet come in at, that fast and then really slow down, or vice versa, something like a car crash. Great examples, I know. Kind of races in and hits it. So that's where you start to the like art of it comes in, and that's where animators and cell animators spend a lot of time tweaking those curves. That's a big part of it. And so that's what they would call if you right click this, that is what's called the temporal interpolation. So that's how it's going to interpolate it over time. But you could also change it how it interpolates over space. What that means is you can add like a Bezier curve. So I'm going to undo that so that it's still going at the same speed. But now if we right click these keyframes and go to keyframe interpolation, and on spatial, click Bezier, you get the handles that you're probably familiar with from Illustrator pads. And now, if you drag those out, now my thing still has these same 2 positions. It's still starting and ending in the same place, but it's taking a different path to get there. So that's another way to kind of control that. And maybe what you would do also with this, there's an easier way to do this, but I'm going to show you the manual way. Maybe you also want to keyframe your rotation along with that to match. So maybe I'll start here. And if we start to add some more keyframes in between, this is a little bit of a sloppy way, but just to give you a sense of now you kind of get that extra little motion in there. Okay, so now the easier way to do this, actually, there's a lot of cool things built in. If you select this, there's something called auto orienting. And I actually don't know where to find it in the menu, but I hit Control Alt O and it brings up auto orientation, which is orient. And if you click orient along path, I don't have to add any keyframes. It just carries it along that path. So that could be helpful. Another way that we animate is maybe we want all of these to come in together. So I'm going to turn off that auto orientation. And this is where that null object comes in. So if we go up to layer, new, null object, you can also do this. I think it's Control Alt N. Nope, that would be a new project. Control. If you're ever curious about the keyboard shortcuts, there's, I didn't really go through the menus, but there's preferences here, and then keyboard shortcuts is here, and you can type in pretty much anything, and you can assign anything you want to any button too. So if you're not sure about what is, how to do something, or if you want to know the shortcut, you can dig in there. But we have this null object, and this is where this other column called parenting and linking comes in. So a null is just it has all the same layer properties, like transform and everything, but it doesn't render. There's nothing to it. It's just the null object. It comes in as opacity 0, but even if you turn it up to 0 or 100, it won't render anything. You won't see that red box or anything. It's really just like a controller. So what you can do is, let's say we want all of the capsules to come in at the same time with this null. Instead of putting position keyframes on all of these individual ones, we can select them all and either come into this parent window and put null1 as the parent. We might even first rename this by hitting enter and call it parent. The other way to do this is if you select all these again. Well, the nice thing about the colors is you can select the label group by color. So I was able to do that and click them all. Next to this parent window, there's also this thing which they call a pick width. And this allows you to set this parameter just by dragging this pink line and letting go. So I drag it to parent, let go. Now parent, you can see, is the parent of all of those. If I move the position of this, they all come with it. They could all scale together. They can all rotate as a group. Opacity isn't going to do anything, but this is kind of the start of maybe how you would bring, maybe animate this in. And then you might do the same with this laptop. So if you can also hit letters on these to bring up just the one parameter. So P brings up position, A brings up anchor point, T brings up opacity, S is scale, and R is rotation. So if we bring up P, I'm going to click that, come back over here, drag it out, and now we have our first animation of these two coming in together. And we're already 5 minutes over, so I am gonna let it go there, but I will save this project as class end in that same folder. So if you want to refer to this, you can, or you can start with one of the fresh ones. But yeah, definitely want to open it up for questions. I'm happy to stay on a little bit if anybody has anything they want to discuss. If not, thanks so much for joining and participating.
Hey, Kevin.
Yeah.
Quick question. So if we want to play around in the file, should we save a copy of it so we're not overwriting your working file?
Yeah, you could either save a copy right here if you wanted to save like an AE file with your initials after or something like that.
Okay.
Or you could copy the whole project over to your local drive or your server if there's somewhere that you work from there,
Okay.
and that should work too. And then you wouldn't have to change the name at all.
Okay.
Yeah, next time we'll dig in a little bit more about how to set up some of the Illustrator files a little bit more and just kind of how we start to think about, I guess, doing more advanced stuff. It basically is just breaking these up into more elements so that, if we looked at my complex one, it's like there's a layer for the circle by itself, and the text is separated, so you can bring all those in and animate them independently.